know that I speak for Ricardo, Kristin, and Stuart in saying that they're honored to have been nominated and are also very congratulatory towards all the other nominees. The case that I am presenting to you about is not a case of the monetary magnitude of many of the other ones you've heard tonight about. It's not a case that resulted in a change in the law. It's not a case that changed the way a whole community handles something. What it's really about is a case about communities. And the first community that it is primarily about is this wonderful community of plaintiffs' lawyers who come together to help each other out when they need it. When someone in our midst finds themselves in a case and needs assistance to go through with that case, a community of all of us comes together to help them. It's also about the court community and the jurors who wouldn't give up even in the midst of a pandemic. And finally, it's about all of these communities who supported a recent immigrant and his family in a case that may sound, when I first tell you about it, like a great case, but when you drill down, you begin to have this sinking feeling in your stomach about how it might come out. Briefly, the plaintiff, Mr. Singh, was 37 years old at the time of the accident, married for 16 years with 2 beautiful young children. And his wife and kids had immigrated from India in 2016. He said they settled in Fresno. He became a long-haul trucker. He was basically carrying produce from the Fresno area throughout the country. On July 21st of 2017, just a year after he had arrived in the United States, he and his co-driver were instructed to go to a tomato packing plant in Yolo County to pick up a load. And this was just on the tail end of them having come off a 5-day long haul trip throughout the United States. They get to the facility. Mr. Singh backs the truck into the loading area. There's a forklift operator area, and he was standing with his co-driver outside of that area. The forklift driver began to load the pallets of tomatoes. And on the 11th load, the forklift operator bumped the pallet, backed up, did not look where he was going. And Mr. Singh, who had decided to walk behind the forklift, was run over. The forklift basically destroyed his right leg, which ultimately had to be amputated. Those sound like pretty good facts because the forklift operator wasn't watching where he was going and Mr. Singh was behind him. But there's always a video. And the video showed Mr. Singh walking across the active loading area with his back to the forklift, not looking where he was going until the impact. And on top of it, Mr. Singh had been told not to walk in that area and had been told to stand outside of the active area. So you get that and you think to yourself, well, that's not so good. The case came to Stuart Chandler in Fresno, and Stuart started working it up. I'm sure getting the hold of the video, finding out that he was told not to stand where he ultimately was. And he calls Ricardo early on in the case, because he remembered that Ricardo had once had a case similar to this. And Ricardo, without batting an eye, told and spent hours on the phone with Stuart, talking through theories, talking through strategies, providing Stuart with sample briefs, sample motions, sample whatever document discovery, whatever he could provide to him over a period of roughly 2 years. And Ricardo never expected anything in return. To Ricardo, that's what you do. When you're a member of this wonderful group of plaintiffs' lawyers, You help people out. So the case gets ready to go to trial. And Stuart calls Ricardo and asks him if he will come in on the case and try it with him. And Ricardo said, yes. And then he showed Mike Bedart the video. I think Mike Bedart thought that Ricardo had lost his Basque mind, but he hadn't. And they proceeded to start trial with Kristin Hobbs filling out the team. And off they are in Yolo, which, if many of you probably do know, those of you from the Sacramento area, is a county around Sacramento. The courthouse is in Woodland, which is about 14 miles from Sacramento. And they start trial in March of 2020, a month that every one of us will always remember. And how did they deal with this horrible situation of the video and the instructions to Mr. Singh? Well, they counted the minutes, just like we all do, just like I'm counting now to make sure I don't run out of time. And it turned out that the forklift operator had actually been doing this lifting of 10 loads on a set time that was about 9 seconds. So Mr. Singh thought he had time, but ultimately he did not have time because the 11th load, the guy did it 9 seconds earlier. And so they threw that at them. And ultimately they're 2 weeks into the trial and the courthouse gets shut down. Judge refuses to declare a mistrial and sends the jury, asks the jury if they'll come back in May. The jury says, sure, we'll come back in May. May comes, the courthouse is still shut. Judge calls the jurors on a Zoom meeting and they all say, sure, we'll come back in June. And then in June, they get there and in a Zoom meeting, they lost 2 of the 14 jurors. So they only had 12. They came back in July. They closed the case right before July 4th. And there was a weekend, the jury was away again. I think everybody was biting their nails, and ultimately
Gretchen, time is up.
And awarded $10 million. It's the perseverance of lawyers like that who try with a community to make sure that there is justice for people that is deserving of this award. Thank you.